Welcome everyone to the first research workshop, Thinking Like a Researcher. In this research workshop, we will talk about how to think like a researcher, the research process, and also how to formulate research questions and hypotheses, as well as give some examples. So before we start with the research workshop, let's have a look at the research process as a whole. And the research process as a whole can be nicely described with this quote that you see here on the screen, which is commonly attributed to Albert Einstein, even though there's actually no evidence that he said it. The quote reads as follows: "If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions." And this quote fits really nicely to describe the research process, because the research process actually involves a lot of conceptual thinking and thinking deeply about what you want to research and how you want to research it before you actually start with the actual research, namely collecting data, running an analysis, and then also deriving conclusions and implications for a management team. So today we talk about the phase 1 out of 4 phases in the research process. Namely, phase 1 describes how we determine the research problem. And the research problem consists out of questions like identify which information we actually need to answer the research problem. We look at research questions and we specify our research objectives. It's important to get the first phase of this research process right, because it informs the following 3 phases, namely selecting the research design in phase 2, then in phase 3 executing the actual research design, and by that we mean collecting and preparing data for analysis and then interpreting data, and then in phase 4 communicating the research results, most likely to a management team, so they can implement actions that improve their business models. Today we focus on phase 1, determining the research problem. And determining the research problem consists of several steps, namely formulating the problem statement, research questions, and hypotheses. And the managerial problem can be seen as only the tip of the iceberg. So the managers only see the very tip of a problem, but they don't know what's lying underneath. And your job as a future marketing or supply chain researcher will be to dive deeper underneath the managerial problem and go from abstract to more concrete. This is highlighted here. So from a managerial problem, we go to a problem statement, then to research questions, then to hypothesis, and last but not least, we run statistical tests informed by our hypothesis. As mentioned, we go from a very abstract and broad managerial problem to a more concrete and concise research question and hypothesis. A problem statement usually consists of multiple research questions, and in turn, a research question consists of 2 hypotheses. Usually we formulate a null and an alternative hypothesis for each research questions, and you will need to do the same for your marketing research project. Then the hypothesis will inform what kind of statistical tests we're going to run, because our statistical tests, they are dependent, or they're dictated by the variables that are included in the statistical test. So based on our dependent and independent variables, we have to select the correct test to investigate our hypothesis. This is very important later on for your marketing research project as well, because if you do not have the right hypothesis, you cannot use the right statistical tests, and for your marketing research project, you will need to conduct several different statistical tests. So let's start with an example. So we have a management problem that could be, we have to develop a package for a new product. This is a very broad and abstract problem, and it could be that there are several ways to develop a new package for a product, right? We could follow an action A or B, or we could even not follow any action. And your job as future business analysts or researchers could be to investigate how we can best approach this management problem. So from this management problem, we will derive a problem statement. And this problem statement usually looks at how do different concepts relate to each other. So we are interested in the relationship between concept X, which could be a certain action, so a change in a certain product package, for example. How does that relate to concept Y, or a certain outcome? So we're interested in the relationship between these two concepts. Then in the research question that we derive for that specific problem statement, we break down concepts into variables. So what you see here is an example. Concept X could be broken down into various different variables, namely variable X1, X2, and so forth. And we want to find out how do variables that form the concepts relate to each other. So we want to investigate the relationship between variable X1 and variable Y1, or the relationship between variable X1 and variable Y2. So we're interested in more specific relationships of certain variables that are nested within a concept. Based on each research question, we then formulate hypotheses. And for hypothesis, we want to find out what is the direction or magnitude of a relationship between two specific variables. Again, as an example, variable X1 and variable Y1. And we want to find out, does variable X1 has a positive effect on variable Y1? So meaning, if I increase variable X1, does variable Y1 also increase? An example for that could be spending on social media. So if your company decides to spend more money on social media, then that could be variable X1. Variable Y1 could be engagement of customers on your social media platforms. Then we would hypothesize a positive effect, right? We would hypothesize spending of social media has a positive effect on engagement on our social media platforms. We can also hypothesize a negative effect, or say that there is no effect or no difference between two variables. Once we've broken the management problem down, we've gone from a very broad funnel of the management problem to a problem statement, over the research question, to a hypothesis. We have to take the implications that we learned from our statistical tests and go back up again and inform the management about implementations or feasible actions, concrete actions that they should undertake to improve or get rid of this management problem. When we formulate research questions, we have three key questions that we need to ask ourselves. Question one is, can we actually measure the variables in the concepts that we want to investigate? Only if we can measure it, we can actually build a questionnaire, collect data, and analyze the data later on. So if you cannot put it in a questionnaire or measure it in a questionnaire of some sort, then it is probably not an adequate research question. Question number two is, why should there be an effect of variable X on variable Y? So only if it makes sense to assume that there is some sort of an effect, and it can be a positive or a negative effect, or some sort of difference, then we should investigate this variable, right? So for example, if we assume that a variable doesn't have an effect on another variable, we don't want to investigate it, right? Or if we already know the effect, we also don't want to investigate it. Take a very common example. Let's say we have variable X is temperature in the world, right? Over a period of a year, the summer is hotter, the winters are cooler. That's our variable X1. And variable Y is ice cream consumption in Europe, let's say. So formulating a hypothesis that says temperature has an effect on ice cream consumption is something that you could measure in a questionnaire, right? You can track temperature for every day of the year, and you can track ice cream consumption throughout Europe from some databases. The question is, are these findings new? We probably know already that in the summer, ice cream consumption will be higher because the temperatures are higher. In the winter, ice cream consumption will be lower because the temperatures are lower. So if you think about the key question number two, it's not just about should there be an effect, but also is it an effect that hasn't been investigated by someone else already? And the third key question is, can we formulate an actionable recommendation if we find an effect? So assuming you'll find an effect, you find evidence in the data that you collected, then you should really ask yourself, well, can I formulate an actionable recommendation to the management team that helps the management team to tackle that specific problem? Now let's investigate another example and see how we move from a management problem to a problem statement. So the management problem in this example is that we want to develop a package for a new product. Now, if the managers come to you and have this management problem, then how do we derive a problem statement from that? What we usually do is we look at academic literature, also managerial literature. We look at real life examples, and we know that product packaging can be a make or break for a product's success. We also look at literature, and we find that Krishna et al. In 2017, for example, know that sensory aspects of a package affect consumer attention and comprehension of value. Sensory aspects of a package are the visual features or the haptic features. It could also be this other sensory features. For example, how does a product feel if you unwrap it? How does it look like? There are even product packages that have smell induced in them. So we just focus on sensory aspects of a package now. So we take the management problem and narrow it down a little bit. We say we want to focus on sensory aspects of our product package because we've seen in research that this has a positive effect. So we narrow down our management problem into a problem statement, which now reads, how do different sensory aspects of package design shape consumer perceptions of or intention towards the product? Now, from the problem statement, we have to move on and select research questions. So the problem statement is shown again on the top of the slide. And now that we know that we want to look at different sensory aspects of package design, we dive deeper into multiple research questions. One research question could be, and we find that again from research, is that we want to focus on visual salience of our product package, because Krishna et al. Found that visual salience is the key sensory aspect for attracting consumers' attention. So in this research, apparently they researched different aspects of sensory packaging, and they found out the most important one is visual salience. So for us, it would make sense to focus on visual salience. So we know from research that visual salience helps consumers notice a product in an assortment. Therefore, our research question number one, and this could be just one research question out of many that we formulate for this specific problem statement, our research question one reads, how does the visual salience of a package influence consumers' perception of the product? So we've narrowed down the broad management problem even further, and now we move on to the last step, formulating hypotheses from the research question. So our research question one was, how does the visual salience of a package influence consumers' likelihood of noticing the product? And we again find in previous research that bright colors have the tendency to increase visual salience, and that should make a product pop out more in a supermarket shelf. We also find in more recent research from van der Heijden et al. 2020 that bright ambient light, that is the light not of the package, of course, but the light in the supermarket or the light in the retail setting, show that the bright ambient light increases consumers' perceived taste intensity of food. Right? So this research found out that by simply increasing the light surrounding a consumer, it changes how consumers perceive the taste intensity of food. So from that, we derive that this effect may also occur for packaging and expected taste intensity. Based on these findings, we break down our research question into one hypothesis, which reads, bright packaging colors increase A, the likelihood of a consumer's noticing the product, and B, consumers' expected taste intensity of the product. So now we have completely narrowed down the management problem over a problem statement, over some research question to one hypothesis that we actually want to test in our questionnaire. So in a questionnaire, we typically have a set of variables or constructs that we're going to test. These variables or constructs, as you will see on the next slide, are always shown in boxes when we draw it, and each arrow that connects two different boxes is an hypothesis. So typical constructs that we measure in marketing or supply chain surveys would be concepts such as brand awareness, brand attitude, or customer satisfaction with a product or a service. One very commonly measured variable is also the purchase intention. This is something you can measure in a survey quite simply by asking the consumer, how likely would you be to purchase the product X or Y? And then you ask the consumer on a scale, let's say from 1 to 7, very unlikely to very unlikely, and you measure if the purchase intention changes if you, for example, develop a new product packaging. Something that we always measure as well in surveys are demographic factors such as age, gender, income, education, because we know that the customers of our companies are different, right? The different age groups, different income levels, and these affect how consumers shop and consume services. That can be any kind of products or services, even logistic services. So another example for typical research design, and I'm telling a bit out of my pocket here. I worked for Zalando for a while in the logistics sector, or the delivery sector actually, and we helped to improve Zalando's supply chains and logistics, especially with regard to the last mile delivery. So the last mile is always done by a local parcel carrier such as PostNL or DHL or the Swiss Post or the Belgian Post and so on. And a typical management problem that not only Zalando but all big e-commerce shops such as Amazon or ASOS or anyone else who's shopping and selling stuff online nowadays has is which delivery options do customers want in an online shop, right? There are various delivery options that we can offer. We can just offer standard delivery. Typically takes 3 to 5 days to deliver a parcel to a customer. But we could also think about on a managerial level the benefits of introducing next day delivery or introducing even same day delivery, right? At Zalando, we discussed that for a while to introduce same day delivery for higher priced items for like luxury brands, because it could be that people on a Thursday night or on a Friday afternoon even still want to get new fashion items, and we wanted to offer them the option to order on a Thursday night or Friday morning and have them ready on a Friday afternoon so they could wear new fashion before they actually go out on the weekend. So these are just some examples of why this managerial problem could be relevant. And once management approaches you with such a problem, it is your job as a researcher, business researcher, marketing or supply chain management researcher to break it down into various problem statements and from there derive research questions and hypotheses. So from the problem statement, we could use various angles as said before. You could say, hey, I want to look at this problem from a demographic segmentation perspective and derive a research question that reads, are there differences between males and females in their expected delivery time? Or you look at it from a psychographic angle, saying, does the customer's time consciousness influence their expected delivery time? So you look at, there are some customers that are more time conscious than others, and therefore we want to investigate for which type of customer the delivery time is more important. Because for these customers for whom it's not that important, we don't need to introduce it, right? We only want to introduce it for the customers that really value it, and they are also probably likely to pay a higher price or a premium subscription for that kind of service. We also can do an experimental investigation and look at, does the framing of an express delivery option influence the customer's choice of the express delivery option? So here we want to investigate on our webpage, if we give customers the option to say, I want express delivery or I don't want express delivery, how does it affect the probability that a customer will choose an express delivery option? So on this slide, we have an example to show you how all these hypotheses and research questions can be drawn into a research model. This is particularly important for you because you have to do that in your first research workshop as well. And for the marketing research project that you guys are following, you will start to come up with your own research model to investigate a certain set of constructs and hypotheses. So here you see the research questions that you formulated on the previous slide. So you see the customer characteristics such as gender and time consciousness that we want to investigate, and their anticipated effect on expected delivery time. So as mentioned before, each yellow box on this slide is a construct or a variable, and each blue arrow could be an hypothesis. So here we, for example, expect that females, as opposite to males, have a larger expected delivery time. We also expect that time consciousness has a positive effect on the expected delivery time, meaning customers that are more time conscious will probably have a higher expected delivery time. So this basically shows you how to draw a research model, and it's important to draw and understand and visualize the research that you want to do early, because the research that you want to do and the research questions that you want to answer defines which kinds of tests you can use. Now you see also all the tests shown on the slide below each hypothesis, and we will dive deeper into the tests in your research workshop 3. But it's important to understand which variables you have, because with some variables you can only do some types of tests. So for example, if you want to compare two independent groups, such as males and females, and want to see if they differ in terms of one variable, such as expected delivery time, then you would need to run an independent sample t-test. If you want to compare more than two groups, such as customers' time consciousness, which you have divided in 3 different groups, such as low, medium, and high, then you would need to run an ANOVA test, and so forth. We will dive more into the tests at a later time in the course, but it's important that you understand how to draw a research model to properly start your MRP. Thank you very much.